Our oceans of blossoming sea bree o'erbrocht, fae fire in the dawn to the macking of merches and the casting of cauldrons that binds us baith. We work with our wills, and I'll hecht you my heed, for forsworn who are to balance as brothers, born you and me, Bran, to gie grace to the chase. Say our bends a brun bracken I'll gar your gut pech, among wheat olives and blonde leaves of birk, we'll chant with our charms for him that mates in the mists. High on the hilltop or down by the burn, we'll fin our proud prey, the stoutest of stags, and him will we hunt, the bonniest of beasts. With his highest of heeds and the finest of fests, as Gartham get greatly on greatest of gifts. Bull of the Hielands, we always deuce dear. Finn names the beginnings and thinks on the hunt. It's after the prefatory material, it's really the heart of Harvey's poem cycle, Finn, which imagines the great culture hero Finn McCool and his dog Bran hunting down the stag of meaning, the stag of mystery, the stag of knowledge. Harvey saw himself as a shamanistic poet almost. The job of the poet was to immerse himself in the natural world and interpret that for the rest of us, to give meaning to what's around us. That's at the heart of his work. And through the cycle of the seasons, as Finn and Bran hunt the dog, we're led through a cycle of almost initiation into a reinterpretation of who we are. One of his other important works, published in Four or Five Poets, is a cycle called In the Silent Licht of the Blood, which I'll maybe have time for a little bit of later, which is a corona. In other words, it's not a sonnet, it's a 12-line poem whose second line provides the first line of the second poem, the third line, the first line of the third poem, and so on, as you go round till the last poem is the same as the first, except it's not. You know, experience transforms us. Harvey was always in search of that greater, wider view. It's very strange to sit here and talk to you. I mean, I feel like an archbishop in this chair. Archbishops in this town don't have a very good history. I can't tell you. I don't know what it's like not to have a twin. Since we were bairns, afore we were bairns, and our mother's Wayne, we were together twice. And that's something I can't tell you about. It's a sair loss. But we're here, not to mourn him, but to celebrate him. There's little enough left. There's a huge amount. There's about 17 CDs of material of him reading. I had hoped to be able to play you a little PowerPoint show with Harvey reading with Ron Shaw's cello, but unfortunately for technical reasons I'm not allowed to do that. So I will have to substitute my voice for his. He was, I think, a craftsman of rare application and skill. He was fascinated by bardic metre. In his youth he studied a great deal of, although he didn't learn the languages, he learned the metres of Old Welsh and Old Irish. He was fascinated by the alliterative verse of the early Middle Ages in Scotland, and that gave him his structure. But he wasn't an academic poet. Most of Finn was written while he was working in the woods. He was a forester. He did that until he was about 40, when a tree fell on him and cracked his neck, and he had to give that up. But he said that the alliterative line was important for him because it was the only way, as he worked down a hill slope, down a drill of trees with his chainsaw, the alliterative line was the only one that would stay in his head, from the top to the bottom, because you can't put your chainsaw down and say, just a minute boys, and write down poetry. You've got to keep it in the heat. And his poetry is made for memorising, it sings itself. And indeed he did work with 784 Company. Memorably, the Finn cycle was toured around Scotland in 86, the summer of 86, and then later again in the Highlands the following year. He worked with musicians of the calibre of Dougie MacLean, Billy Jackson, Hamish Moore did the music for the show. I mean, top-class musicians. I saw it in Falkland Palace one summer evening, and it's a thing I will never...
Even because after Howard's little book, which is the I'm very proudly to be the only one Chinese poet being translated into Scots. And so in that case, even greater than all classical Chinese poetry. I don't think, they may be being translated, I don't know. But anyway, I remember when we launched this little book in the International Book Festival in Edinburgh, and Harvey, after he read the Scots translation, and he spoke out, the first sentence was, "I feel those poems are mine," which is he thought was so close, the way of thinking in the poetry, with the language, and I thought it was extremely beautiful. Even so, he and Brian is a twin, well, with me, let's say, adopted trail, but this meeting is so, what does he say?
Adopted triplets.
Okay, I don't know that word. Anyway, trail as the musical groups are also working in that way. Well, together with Harvey and especially Anne, Harvey's wife, here, and we had such wonderful time and many shining poems deeply carved in the mind. For example, maybe for my whole life, I was the only one once. I have only one experience to be someone who was able to try to teach people cooking, which is in Anne and Harvey's home, we made this fried sliced potatoes, and Harvey loved it with the pepper, with the vinegars, with sour and spicy. He said, "Oh, potato could be eaten in this way. It's very, very nice. I feel my garden is too small now to plant the potatoes." And also, well, I remember very clearly once, that was maybe 95 or something, it was about 5 years I've been in exile, and Harvey and I, we took the train from Dundee to Edinburgh, and he pointed out that mountain and say, "Look at that mountain, the castle, the ruin of the castle of Macbeth. It's there, Macbeth, it's there." And it was so deeply touched me, not only because of Macbeth, but because a poet showed another foreign poet some treasures in his own country. And after 5 years, I've been traveling so many places, I almost forgot that feeling, you know, to be a poet in my own country and show something. It was a shock to me, and that internal dissidence, you know, the journey is not only external but always internal. And I understood my own poems after 5 years being complete write English poetry only when I'm ill. And then luckily, or not luckily, actually I have his English poems sent to me, and one was beautiful with a sentence I like so much, which is looking at words in wonder, deep sin, wild old beauty. And in my later poem, I answered that line, "Wild old beauty is the only beauty we know." And that was in the poem, Notes of a Blissful Ghost. I think with that wild old beauty, all poetry actually got together and becoming our unique mother tongue. And I think that's the thing for Harvey.
One of the things I wanted to do before I went to Hong Kong in 1999 was to set up, I had it all set up for Harvey and Yang Lian to go round and do something like follow Boswell and Johnson's Highland Tour. Because I thought the idea of Harvey explaining to Yang and Yang reacting and having Boswell and Johnson to comment as well would have made a very interesting little radio series. Unfortunately, it never happened, and it never will now, but you know, we could do it. If there's any radio producers, get that. Sorry, after that short commercial break. I think really It's an unfortunate thing that Harvey's last years were, he was never critically ill, but he was never well for many years. And his writing did tail off. He kept on writing, but what tailed off even more was his willingness to go out to the world. He did fewer and fewer readings. Indeed, by the time when we launched for the Deep Sea Divals, you know, he was physically weak, his voice was weak. He was a very strong reader, a great performer, and a marvellous performer with music. So how do we honour his legacy, really? And as I say, you know, within the family we're trying to work towards getting a CD of performances issued, and I think something has to be done about the poetry. I don't know how many notebooks Anne has. For months Anne kept saying, I've just found another notebook. So there's an awful lot of material, and his handwriting is famously difficult. Really, I mean, over breakfast Yang asked me to interpret this. These, incidentally, the only two known poems he ever wrote in English, and I was struggling with it. Even me, I'm struggling with his handwriting. So once we overcome some of these hurdles, I think we should be, I would love to see collected works or selected works, because I think he's a poet that demands attention for his vision and for his craftsmanship. Now, springtime, beautiful, a day like today, perfect. This is the spring section of the